Welcome to IFPRI's new show, Inside Track. My name is Smita Agarwal, and today we bring to you stories of IFPRI researchers, how they got started, their work, and how they hope to contribute to a sustainable future. Joining me today is my colleague and senior research analyst, Angga Pradesha. Angga works with the Development Strategy and Governance Division. Angga grew up in Indonesia, studied in Malaysia, Japan, before he joined IFPRI. Well, tune in to this conversation online as well and drop us any questions that you have in the comment box below. Welcome to the show, Angga.
Thank you. Thank you, Smita.
So, Angga, our first question to you, and a question I know that our online audiences are really interested in, is why did you decide to study agriculture?
Well, I think one of the factors that, I live in developing countries. I was exposed to the life of farming activities and rural, life. I remember when I was a kid, my dad take me and the whole family to his hometown, and then, I witnessed how the rural people live. The thing is, what struck me is that when I was very young, and I was struck when I look at my uncle and my auntie going in the morning to the field and then coming back home, have to fetch water from the public well and collecting woods for cooking, and when they cook, all the kitchen full of smoke. So it's pretty tough life for them. And then I was thinking, why they cannot have the life that we had in Jakarta, right? This question sit for a while until I reached high school. I had a chance to visit Australia for a homestay program, stayed there for a few weeks, and you can tell, life in Australia much convenient than Jakarta. And again, another question come up, but in different direction. I'm asking why can we have, this living condition in Jakarta, right? All the great transportation system, green view everywhere, fresh air, no traffic. So I think this kind of development gaps across regions and nations really helped shape my decision to get into the econ program, and I did my degree at Bogor Agricultural University at the time. Yeah. So.
And from there, you made your way to Malaysia and Japan.
Right. So I think I'm not sure. So why I did my master's degree, but I have some kind of interest to do some research, even though at that time I did my undergrad thesis, but then it seems that I want to know more, and I went to Malaysia, and then I got a scholarship to go to Japan, and in Japan that's the first time I know about IFPRI. I took a class called Computable General Equilibrium Model. In that class we learned about the CG model, and IFPRI has publication about CG. And the funny thing is that one of the author of that book publication is Sherman Robinson, and later on, he's the one who interviewed me during the job interview with IFPRI. But that's the first time I know IFPRI, and also some publication I read that helped me to shape my research question for my master thesis. And I ended up doing a research that really focused on what IFPRI is doing, is international trade, poverty, and food security area. And I use CG model to answer those questions, the tools that I use to answer the questions. So I did that, and then after that, since I know IFPRI, I sometimes browse around the website, and I suddenly found out a job opening at IFPRI. And when I see it, well, it quite fit to what I've been doing in my master. But it's in the U.S. Competition is pretty tough. I thought, okay, I'll just apply and forget about it. But after a while, then I got an email and going through selection process, interview, and so on. And finally I got a job.
So were you convinced at that point that you want to pursue a career in international agricultural development, or was it an experiment?
No. The thing is, before I went to IFPRI, I actually worked in the research institute in Japan, in Tokyo. So I had an experience working in the research area, and I love it. I like it, and I want to keep doing it. That's why when I got an offer from IFPRI, I definitely take the opportunity.
So, what do you think contributed the most in terms of your preparation for your current role at IFPRI?
Sorry, can you repeat again?
So, what do you think contributed the most in terms of your preparation for your current role at IFPRI?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things that helped me to, to do the work at IFPRI is that, to be practical, I think the data processing program or software that you know about, and then because that's kind of a key skills that you need to do the analysis. And then after that, the research skill itself. So I did my master's, right? And then that kind of skill really helped me to understand the flow of the research activities from, collecting data, doing literature review, doing analysis, and finally writing the results.
So in this process, the research process is a long process. Sometimes it takes several years as well.
Right.
What do you enjoy the most about this process?
Yeah, I think the first time the learning process is quite peak, right? You just have to learn a lot of things, learning from your supervisors, the senior staff, and from there you kind of get an idea, okay, how the work looks like, right? And then once you got a more responsibility, take a lead role on some research, then you start moving into kind of an engagement with the government, right? Because IFPRI mainly work on the policy analysis, and it's not uncommon for IFPRI to have work with the policymakers in the process. So I think that's part of the thing that I start learning and enjoying, where you really have interaction with the policymakers and refining your research questions.
Interesting. So we know that at IFPRI, there are several projects which are going on at the same time. So how are you able to bring focus to the project, and what are the projects that you're currently working on?
Right. So in the last several years, apparently I'm mainly working on the rice policy issues. So this rice policy actually a big issue in Asian countries mostly, because it's been going on for decades, right? And when you talk about it, it's kind of a sensitive issue because there's a political factor in it. And also when I look at it, it can be seen as a policy dilemma for the government, because what they're trying to do is they try to intervene the market, try to make sure the consumer receive, not too high price, while the producer receive not too low price. So with limited resources, this market intervention is really, really costly. And we did, some analysis, if this cost or cost of intervention being used for other program, they could have gained more benefit, much more benefit than what they should have. But I think probably this strong intervention probably appropriate in the first stage of development, but then many developing countries in Asia right now is already become developing countries, and I think they start to phase out this policy eventually.
Interesting. Could you let us know more about what are some of the countries in which you're working?
The countries?
On rice policy, what are some of the countries?
I did work in the Philippines, mainly in the past 2-3 years, and then I recently started now working in Bangladesh. And these two countries has a different kind of a policy structure, right? I mean, Philippines very strong in its intervention, but recently they finally decided to do policy reform. Now they try to open up the market, while Bangladesh already started opening up the market since like 1990s, mid-90s, and also another factor, because India, the neighboring countries of Bangladesh, is rice exporter, a big rice exporter, and being close distance really benefit the Bangladesh to have cheaper import compared to the Philippines, which is quite in a sense remote compared to the Bangladesh, and the Philippines is not very close to the major exporter countries. Yeah.
Interesting. When we hear of research, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers online may also sort of share this, that we think of research in probably being conducted in a lab or our headquarters in Washington, D.C. Is that true at all?
Yeah, I think for IFPRI it's quite different. Perhaps in the university, where most professors doing the research really try to advance the literature, right? They mainly look at the theory, technical part. But IFPRI really, the research really blended in a policy question. So most of the time we engage a policymaker, and then we most of the time go to the country, have a dialogue, and when we come up with our research findings, we share it in the policy forum, and inviting all the stakeholders to listen and get feedback from them about our research. So I think Yeah, for IFPRI case, I don't think it's the case. It's really really focused on the policy issues.
So that does mean that there's a lot of involvement with on-ground stakeholders, field visits, etc.
Right. Yeah. So for policy analysis that I usually do, we before we come up with research question, usually we have a consultation meeting with the stakeholders, right? Then we try to refine our research question, whether what we want to answer is what the government really needs, and then from there, once we get the finding, for example, then we try to push more how this research finding can be implemented, for example, by the policymakers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You referred to something interesting in the beginning of the interview. You talked about CG modeling. Could you tell us a little bit more about CG modeling, and for the benefit of our audience as well, let us know how do you use CG modeling in research?
Yeah, so CG modeling is just one of the economic models that most researchers use, but the approach is quite different compared to other models, because this CG model is really based on a structural model where we try to capture the relationship and the condition of the economy as a whole, so we can see the connection across sectors, across agents, household, businesses, governments, and how they interact in the market, right? So we try to capture it in this, what we call the SAM database, social accounting metrics. This is really linked to the national account where the statistical office
Did you say SAM?
Yeah, SAM, social accounting metrics.
Okay.
And behind this, the data is coming from the national account where we publish, periodically by the statistical office. So, yeah, we validate the data by looking at what published by the government, and then use that to capture what's the condition of the economy, and then we bring that to the model, and then make it alive in the sense that we build interaction across agents between household, government, and businesses, and producers and consumers. And then there's also tools like taxes or subsidy that the government can choose from. So it's a comprehensive and model that could help the policymaker to see the broad idea of their economy, and then they can ask question: what if I introduce, for example, 5% increase in income tax, or what if I take out the subsidy of fertilizer? So they kind of anticipation. Okay, this is what will be not only the agriculture sector, but also on the rest of the economy.
So you're trying to provide answers for some of the most difficult questions that policymakers face.
We try to help out. I mean, at least the broad idea, we can have confidence to offer. Yeah.
Interesting. So also, I'm sure our online viewers will be interested in knowing this. What does a typical day look like for you, Angga, at IFPRI?
Well, every day I try to accomplish small tasks or assignments that I list out based on the project that I work on. Sometime in the first stage of the project, I will busy mainly collecting data, doing literature review, and then running to meetings because we share, what we found with our team members. And then from there, again, as I said, we have consultation meeting with collaborators. We flew to the country and share what we plan to do for our research, and then we got a feedback from them, and we, then I come back and refine our research question and start, building the model itself, and then do some analysis, simulation scenarios and analysis, and do the write-up, and then I think the final stage is that we share the output with the public, and get feedback from the government as well as the other stakeholders.
Interesting. Before I move on to our next question, I do want to remind our online audiences, you can also ask Angga a question and join this conversation. Do not forget to drop your question below in the comment box. Angga, what about some of the skill set that you require for this job? Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
I mean, again, it depends on where your stages is. Like in the early stages, probably you really heavily involved in data processing, and then later on, you start moving to do some analysis and running some simulation, for example, and then and then from there, then you start engaging with the collaborator or policymakers. So I think the first stage, like you kind of need, again, the software or programming skill where you know some software, data processing software to analyze the data, basically, right? And then after that, then you use your research skill in when you're doing master or dissertation to do some analysis to find the research question that you want to answer. And then finally, the communication skill, like doing the presentation and so on. I think that's what will be useful.
Interesting. So on the research side, would you say that the kind of work that you are doing at IFPRI requires more quantitative research skills or qualitative research skills?
Right. At IFPRI overall, I think we have both, talents. In my case, I work mainly on quantitative approach with my team because the CG modeling that I told you is really based on the economic model. Even though we our analysis is heavily driven by the quantitative approach, but we don't ignore what happened or other factors that going on the ground. For example, like this price policy analysis that we are working on, even though we know that the best policy option is to liberalize the market, right? But we understand that there is political interest from the farmer, for example. So we have to take into account that into the analysis, and also what happened to the poor, right? We have to see the impact of this policy reform to the poor. That we have to take into account. So we try to tailor the policy recommendations based on both, all factors, including these qualitative factors, but we put into the quantitative analysis.
Interesting. So, at IFPRI, our mission is to reduce hunger and eradicate poverty. How do you think that the work that you are doing is contributing towards this? And what do you feel are some of the big challenges or big issues that are coming up in your area of research? We know that it's not only rice policy, but you also work on climate change and some of the other pressing issues. So if you could flag some of the big...
Right. Yeah, I think, if I can see broadly, the research that I've been doing, the main objective of the research is to really try to help the government to come up with a good policy and efficiency in economic term. So in doing that, I think if I look at, from a distance, one of the main tools or the key tools that the government has is that the policy lever that they have is is the money, the budget, the public investment, basically. So they need to allocate a certain amount of money. Every year they must have a budget to certain programs, right? And the way they do that, the way they allocate their funding sometimes doesn't really match with the development goals that they want to achieve, right? Because it's pretty complicated. You have dozens of programs, also maybe 5 or 6, development goals that you want to achieve in the future. So one time, I think, I sat down with as a team, we sit down with a policymaker who responsible to allocate this funding, this agricultural budget investment. And he said, the way I usually allocate the budget is actually like looking at what happened in the past, So I just follow that kind of a pattern. Well, it may be true, but the thing is, if you look at the structure of the economy, and then the dynamic of the budget and the changes of development goals of the government, I think there should be kind of a systematic way to link up this public investment portfolio with the development goals that the government want to achieve, right? So I think that's one of the key issues that I'm interested in, and James Cyril, my supervisor, has been working on this issue for a while, and he has this model that really try to a model that can help the government come up with a different investment portfolio across program in order to achieve certain development goals based on the rank, And I'm glad to be part of the team, and it's something that
that's very interesting thing that you mentioned, Angga, and in fact that brings me to my next question: why should people care about research?
Yeah, I think. Research is not really, you cannot really see immediate impact on research, right? It takes time, and sometimes it's kind of people can say gambling because you don't know whether it's going to be work out or not. But I think in our case, if we look at the link our research with the policy impact, right? The decision, whatever decision that the government make, it will impact the people in their country. Like for example, if the government decided to take out the fertilizer subsidy, the farmer will be affected, right? If the government decided to liberate the rice market, so the rice producer or rice business will be impacted. So, and those decisions, most of the time right now, I think backed up by the evidence, and we at IFPRI support on that. Really, we try to do our research and come up with policy combination that would help the government to achieve this, let's say, optimal policy option.
And that touches everybody's lives.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if society sometimes people kind of complain why the government doing this, right? And then they do demonstration, for example. I mean, I take the extreme case, but I think if that's the case, then people can look at why government doing this based on this mechanism or economic situation behind it. And so the business can be well informed in advance. If the government take policy A, what happened to their industry, and they can decide whether I have to be in the business or out of the business, or whether I have to put more investment or take on my investment.
So all the trade-offs.
Yeah.
So before I move to our final question, before I move to our online question, I do have a final question for you. We know a lot of our audience on Facebook. A lot of our audience is interested in knowing if you have any advice for them, if they want to join this field, what would you recommend to our online audiences?
Yeah. So I think based on my experience, I mean, I feel lucky that I got a job at IFPRI because it just happened that I did some stuff that IFPRI is doing, right? So I think if somebody interested in doing, pursuing a career in research, one thing that I think is important or key is to have a passion to work on some issues that they want to work on, right? And then if they found that already, then if they're right now in the greater program, they can use that opportunity working on their dissertation or thesis, looking at the issue that they want to understand or they want to research on. And then from there, I think another factor is, again, this skill in data processing. Yeah, I think we need to have a skill set, understanding how to operate certain software to conduct data processing. And yeah, I mean, most universities right now, I think, offer courses that really focus on learning these tools. Even if you cannot find in your university, plenty of online, global online program offer with very affordable price. So yeah, I think research skills and skill set in data processing is a key, and I think just wait for the luck to come.
And passion.
Yeah, exactly. The first one is passion.
Nice. So we'll move on to our online question. We do have an online question, and we have a question from Lucy Hulbert from Washington, D.C. And she wants to know if you could expand more on your research and the impact that your research had, specifically rice policy in the Philippines.
Well, yeah, the Philippines is quite unique because when we work first time, we work mainly on the climate change issues, right? And then this climate change is a big thing in the Philippines because it's I think, the most vulnerable country in the world. So it's a big concern for the government. And then the team come up with kind of a policy adaptations from the on-farm to the off-farm policy recommendation or adaptation. And some team recommending there should be an R&D investment, of course. That's really help out in improving the productivity. But the rice policy itself actually could be one way to adapt to climate change, because climate change really hit all the crops, right? And if the government really try to support the rice, which is considered a low value added compared to other crops, then what the government is doing is really putting the money into a black hole, because first the policy, the price control for rice is not really work well, right? And then the market is too big, so the government really had a hard time to really control the price. So I think the rice then we come up with this rice policy reform to help the country adapt to the climate change. And our analysis really find out that it really helps to promote structural transformation process, and really help to increase long-term growth. And furthermore, it helps the poor, because if you allocate this funding for the cash transfer, for example, right, the poor actually get more benefit than the government tries to control the market. So yeah, that's when we come up with the policy recommendation back then. And then after that, I said there will be a follow-up, and we were involved. We were requested by the government to conduct policy evaluation for this trade liberalization policy, and we just completed recently. Yeah.
So there's a continued engagement on ground with issues.
Right. And they actually contribute to the policy reform law that just enacted recently. Yeah.
That's very exciting. Well, we have another question stream in from Facebook from one of our live audience members, from Jenny Smart from Washington, D.C. And she wants to know, what research finding have you contributed to that excites you most? And what was its, and some of the key policy issues or outcomes regarding that policy?
Yeah, I think Philippines is one of my favorite, because it's really strong engagement with the government, and we kind of have some influence to help them to develop this rice policy reform, which is this introduced this year. And also, I think I also involved in one research on climate mitigation, and that research was published in a journal article, with the team members, and that paper was quoted by the Senate and to propose a tax reform in the country.
The Philippine Senate?
Yes, yeah. That was on carbon tax, I think.
Right.
And then, learning about that, it's pretty rewarding, because, we're glad that, our research being used by the policymaker, at least to consider, the reform in the
and you are able to see some impact in front of you of the work you've done.
Right.
Yeah. And so, well, that was all for today, and we are ready to wrap up. A reminder to our online audiences to stay tuned for the next 3 episodes for the month of August. You'll find the description about those, more details and description about those episodes in the description box below. Do not forget to like and follow us on Facebook for the latest updates from IFPRI. Thank you all for joining us today.